Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's Freemanjack on TNS Radio for the Freeman League. I hope you've been enjoying the bit of Tom Campbell I was playing through while Mally's slot is waiting to be filled. Somebody needs to fill Mally's ample boots. I'm sure we'll find someone soon enough. And the Tom Campbell was in fact a preamble for tonight's topic, which is basically going to be a discussion about Tom Campbell's ideas about digital virtual reality, but also incorporating some of Buckminster Fuller's work in geometry and the underlying geometry of nature. A bit more Tom, just to explain himself a little more clearly there and more succinctly. Okay, so some might question why I would want to bring a topic like this to the air on TNS particularly, or why I should think that it's so relevant for people to become acquainted with. And just to, as a kind of forerunner to what I'm going to be discussing, I suppose I'd like to discuss that at some length. Essentially, the new physics that appears to be coming out, if it is correct in its analogies, and if its science proves to be well-founded, and it's certainly looking to my eyes that it is, I'm finding an awful lot of correlation and corroboration between different streams of science all working on various boundary areas in the sciences. First of all, the sciences are merely a means for modelling reality. Obviously, if you're going to intellectually consider something that exists in the real world, it's very inconvenient to have to get that real world thing into your hands and study it in front of you. If it's possible to accurately model real world events in a theoretical sense, then this allows you to consider much broader constructs without the need for huge scientific equipment other than that to carry out follow-through experiments to see whether or not your intellectualising on the subject was founded in reality or not. And the reason why I bring this subject to you more to the point is because we all find ourselves here in the TNS posse discussing matters of law, matters of legislation, matters of societal structure, all sorts of considerations in which we feel ourselves perhaps to be victimised by the current system, or that the current system is somehow faulty, in need of replacement. And I have always been very reserved about investing too much of my intent into a lot of these subjects, simply because I have had cause to fear the potential products of that intent that I have had cause to be concerned in the past that my belief in the agencies of law to administer my affairs over and above me, to lord over me, has actually led me into situations where they quite literally have administered my affairs and lorded over me. And it was part of my embracing some of the sort of Freeman concepts, and certainly some of the broader freedom concepts, that led me into the realms of considering that perhaps the model that we're given for reality, as full of paradox as it is by the mainstream media, was somehow corrupted, that the story had got dogmatised. And certainly my knowledge of the sort of life stories of a couple of fairly bold scientists of the last century, and how they were stigmatised and sidelined by the mainstream sciences for very simple questions, very basic questions. I mean, Eric Laithwaite was one in particular. The man who invented the maglev train was essentially turned into a persona non gratis in the entire scientific community because of a pendulum that he mounted on a roller skate. Many of you may remember his fabulous experiment that he used to do on the children's Christmas lectures on BBC Two every Christmas from the Royal Institution Lecture Hall, where he would spin up a 180-pound gyroscope on the end of sort of a 4-foot pole and ask one of the children from the audience, and would usually pick a slight one, and invite them to come and sit on a spinning office chair. And by sitting them on the spinning office chair, these children would be able to, with very little effort, raise this 180-pound spinning gyroscope above their head. The consequence was singing puppies, that the inertia turned through 90 degrees due to the action of the gyroscope and began to rotate the child on the chair. So the force that would go into gravity went into rotation. And again, he felt that this raised some very significant questions about the fundamental nature of the physical sciences and whether or not our model was correct. The pendulum experiment was quite simple for anybody to replicate. Basically, you mount a mast on the back of a roller skate type device or any kind of wheeled smooth rolling device, and mount a pendulum at 90 degrees to the roller skate, so it swings from side to side instead of backwards and forwards. And when you pitch the pendulum into motion, the roller skate will initially kind of rock backwards and forwards, but will then move in one given direction, and having then started moving in that direction, it will then continue to only move in that direction. And again, normal science doesn't really have a way of explaining that. Shut up! Where's the other bone? There were 2 bones here earlier. What did you do with the other one? I bet you've lost it under the bloody chair, haven't you? Hold on. Squeaky ball. Take the squeaky ball. Shut up. Let's hope that works. Scoop of bleach, you must be joking. Need a bloody shovel with these two. Oh, for God's sakes. I think you two need to go out. Don't be taking your bone with you. Hold on, let me sort these two out. Alright, that's rid the living room of nasty, noisy puppies. That was easy roll as we walk this land. Okay, so essentially we've got some fairly basic experiments that anyone can carry out that question the SI model, the standard international model that most schools will teach as the sciences. So, left with initial questions that remained unanswered, I began to consume all of the most current science that I can get my hands on, which wasn't a great deal, largely reliant on the science journals, Science and New Scientist and the like. And I began to see that with this suspicion in the data that we were being given, in this suspicion in the model that we were being presented with, I began to search out published scientific articles that either supported the current SI model or refuted it. And I began to find that more and more papers were being submitted that showed errors in the current model. Then I came across Nassim Haramein, and Nassim Haramein's take on the sub-ether and the nature of reality and its relation to sacred geometry is a fascinating one. I do, however, feel that he's probably wrong. He's certainly got a lot right, but that the assumptions or the conclusions that he appears to be extrapolating from his theories may be somewhat wide of the mark. But essentially, in Nassim Haramein's work, he talks about the star tetrahedron and its relation to sacred geometry and the nature of the underlying sort of nature of the universe. Now, a lot of people don't really get the significance of sacred geometry, the Fibonacci sequence, things like phi, the phi ratio, and their huge importance. But if I can start perhaps by describing the Fibonacci sequence, which many people will know is the underlying number of nature, that the Fibonacci sequence, the majority of living things retain proportionality according to the Fibonacci sequence. Now, essentially, if we consider the Fibonacci sequence to be a fractal algorithm, in as much as it is self-replicating and self-complexifying, let me explain. The Fibonacci sequence is 0 plus 1 equals 1, 1 plus 2 equals 3, 2 plus 3 equals 5. So what we're seeing there is the sum. Just a very few there, please, Michael.
We're at the side of the left side.
Yeah, no, hardly any.
Sorry.
Put me off with the thread. Right, okay. So 0 plus 1 equals 1. 1 plus 2 equals 3. 3 plus 2 equals 5. 5 plus 3 equals 8. What we're seeing is the product, the sum of each of each output from an algebraic function being used as the initiator to go to the next algebraic function. So essentially, if we were writing a piece of software that would describe a Fibonacci spiral, then we may tell it, let A equal 0, let B equal 1. A plus B equals C, and then let C equal A. Run again. So essentially, in that simple subroutine, you would have the ability to self-replicate the initiator, the 0 and the 1, to replicate those to an infinity of number sequence that were self-replicating and required no outside creator. So essentially what we have there is we have the universe's fundamental fractal generator. It's very economical. It doesn't require any outside influence. It's purely self-driven. Okay, if we add to this, that would produce a purely linear sequence, so a one-dimensional sequence of numbers. If, however, we begin to introduce phi, 1 over 1.618. Where is he tonight, anyway? Not about, anyway. Right, okay. Thank you, Corky, for putting that into the chat box. He's just put in the 0 plus 1 equals 1, etc., etc. So if we then introduce things like the phi ratio, which is another part of the rule set of life, that the proportionality of living organisms correspond to within a remarkable degree of coincidence to the phi ratio of 1 over 1.618. 1.6, whatever. Look it up for yourselves. I think at this conjuncture I may need to fall back onto Buckminster Fuller. If anybody out there doesn't know Buckminster Fuller's work, if you've seen my little logo in the host's podcast page, cheers Michael, you'll see that it's a geometric geodesic dome with 60 points, and that this is actually something commonly referred to as a buckyball. And Buckminster Fuller realised that the underlying three-dimensional atomic shape of carbon and its available bonds could theoretically collect together under certain circumstances and form a perfect three-dimensional spherical geodesic dome with the minimum number of connections and the minimum number of points. At the time, carbon-60, as it would be known, was known not to exist on Earth. There was no known carbon-60 in the universe when Buckminster Fuller proposed this as a theory. Later, under spectral analysis of distant suns, on a spectrograph you get lines, black lines, missing from the spectrum, and that these lines correspond with certain atomic elements. And on examining the light from distant suns, Buckminster was able to essentially prove the existence of C60 as a substance found in distant suns, and subsequently, after his death, fullerene, as it's known, has been created here on Earth under extreme pressures and temperatures, and the possibilities of fullerene of C60 are just incredible. If you add an extra ring of carbon to a fullerene atom, a fullerene molecule, essentially you can knit a tube, and with this C60 nanotube, you would essentially have something a few nanometers in diameter and capable of lifting something that an inch thick piece of steel would be needed to in any other sense. So by way of a kind of fibre technological revolution, when we master the manufacturing of C60, we will really be into a new materials age. Thank you, Churchhead. Is that C60 you're posting? I don't dare click on the link just in case anything goes horribly wrong. Alright, okay, so let's just... now this Buckminster Fuller, bearing in mind he was a very old man when he did this particular lecture. I think it was pretty much his last one that he did publicly. It's a televised lecture. The video hasn't captured the audio brilliantly, and he is a very old man with quite a quaky voice, so it can be quite difficult to listen to. But I advise you all to listen very, very carefully to what he is saying about the substructure, the matrix of space being tetrahedral and not cubic, that all modern sciences, that all modern geometry relies on. I think she's sitting up outside Boo's door crying. Is tetrahedral, and that this is why the current scientific model does not describe reality in any with any real significant corroboration when it comes to geometries and space-time. It's left very lacking, and the great Buckminster Fuller here, probably sometime in the 60s, explains exactly why they're wrong, and unfortunately people still aren't listening, and as far as I'm aware, this still isn't largely been taken up by the mainstream. But I'll go on to explain perhaps some of the concepts that he puts across in this next 6 minutes. It's only 6 minutes, so listen hard and see if you can get it. Right, okay.
Momentarily irrelevances to the situation, the constellation that I was concerned with. And having discovered that my conscious part was this holding off irrelevances, I found that the irrelevances fell into two main categories. All the experiences which were too large and too infrequent in any way alter or tune in with the magnitude of relationships I was considering, and all the experiences in my life which were too high frequency, too small to in any way be measurable at the magnitude I'm considering. So there was really a tunable set. And because the experiences were inherently omnidirectional observations, because our Earth is revolving and we are revolving and we're going around the sun, continual readdressing of our view in many, many directions, then the dismissal of the irrelevance into a macro and a micro group was an omnigeometrical phenomenon, sending them outwardly and inwardly, and that there was then a lucid set of stars that were quite clearly relevant to one another, and that lucid set then defined an insideness and an outsideness. They were between the outsideness, the macrocosm, and insideness, the microcosm. And we then found that the minimum number of stars that could define an insideness and outsideness would be a tetrahedron. As the 2 points had between us but no insideness, outsideness, 3 points had between us but no insideness, outsideness, not rather 4 points. So as we came to a system, and we're looking for the fundamental number of interrelationships of some things that provoked us, we didn't know what other items might be in it. If we only saw 3 of them, there could very readily be a 4th one. So as we began to really dismiss properly, we'd find out which side that 4th one might be, to give the insideness and outsideness. And we found that there were 4 points, but also the 4 points have 6 interrelatednesses. So we have a prime number 3 and a prime number 2 geometry being generated here by the process of thought. And that I developed a great deal more with you on the idea of the tetrahedron then being the minimum system, because I defined a system as an aggregate of events that divided the universe into all the universe outside the system, all the universe inside the system, a little bit of the universe which is a system, was the defining subdivision. The tetrahedron is a minimum system of universe, and it turned out to be then omnitriangulated. We found that structures are always triangulated. Structure meant triangle, triangle meant structure. There were no other stable polygons. Therefore, tetrahedron turned out to be the minimum structural system of universe. We did a whole lot more exploring, reviewing about tetrahedra, the cheese platonic solids, and the splicing parallel to the faces of them, and discovering that all of them were made asymmetrical by such slicing, with the exception of the tetrahedron, simply became a smaller but absolutely regular symmetrical tetrahedron, if we sliced parallel to any of its 4 faces. So we found it's the only geometry that could accommodate, whose symmetry could persist as a symmetrical system universe, and yet accommodate alterations, aberrational alterations, uneven alterations. The other geometries could not coordinate such phenomena. So we found that everything was reference to 4 planes that were subtending the 4 vertexes of the tetrahedron, so that we were dealing in a basic 4-dimensional system. I've made many references since that time, coming back to tetrahedron and structures, and we get into then just recognizing quite late yesterday that in the water people and the mathematics of the water people coming from the Indian Ocean to Babylon to Crete and then to the Ionian Greeks, the possibility that the king's symbol of the hexagon, the 6 equilateral triangles, and the household or the distaff side using the square somehow indicated that they got into the public domain, general domain, for the first time in history, the mathematics in terms of reference to x, y, z coordinates of the square, but not in relation to the x, y, z, the w, x, y, z of the the four axi of symmetry of the four triangles of the tetrahedron. So that we find dimensionality suddenly then being identified with the previously by society only with perpendiculars to the system, assuming you have to have rectilinearity. But we find then if you can have four sets of perpendiculars to the tetrahedron to symmetry, and this is the only fully fundamental symmetry that's not altered, so that we find that this four-dimensional quality of the tetrahedron makes it possible to model four-dimensional, five-dimensional models, whereas you could not model with cubes anything more than 3 dimensions. Fourth dimension was not accommodated. So that we found that the tetrahedron volume was 1 and the cube was 3 when the volume is 1, so that if you use cubes, you're using 3 times as much space to identify the number agglomeration, and the tetrahedron then seemed to be not only nature's basic, simplest structural system in absolute limit case, but it also then seemed to be the basic unit of quantation, and we found that we were able to identify that with the quantum mechanics with 1 unit of quantum. So I'm now going to develop some more with you today of the synergetic geometry.
Oh, okay, so before the tunes there, we had Buckminster Fuller talking about the underlying space, the shape of space being tetrahedral. Anybody that didn't quite grasp what he was talking about there, essentially a tetrahedron is a pyramid made of triangles. So it would be a pyramid with a triangular base rather than like the Egyptian pyramids or the Mayan pyramids with a square base. So we're essentially talking a triangular pyramidical structure. And what he was saying there is that the tetrahedron is the fundamental unit of space. It is the quanta of space. If you subdivide a tetrahedron, you end up with a smaller tetrahedron. And so with tetrahedrons, you can build tetrahedron on tetrahedron. Alright, essentially, if you're going to describe 3D space in the current scientific model, that would be done using a cubic model where the X, Y and Z axes would describe up, down and sideways. Up, down, forward and back and left and right. And from this we would extrapolate out that all space is cubic in nature. I think the pups have just eaten the missus's dinner. Shouldn't be laughing really, naughty little gits. Can't leave anything bloody untouched with them little gits. Right, okay, so to define three-dimensional space, we need a minimal number of points and a minimal number of sides and a minimal number of surfaces, and the tetrahedron ticks all of these boxes. Following on from Nassim Haramein's work with the tetrahedron, he actually points to the star tetrahedron, which is two opposite tetrahedrons inserted through each other, like the two-dimensional Star of David symbol, but in 3 dimensions. And I tend to follow that thinking. Certainly the universe would appear to be entirely polaric. In other words, there's always an up and a down, a positive and a negative, a north and a south, a hot and a cold, and that these polarities would not be able to be described by the simple tetrahedron. That the two tetrahedrons would essentially be matter and antimatter, space and anti-space. Like I say, hot and cold. There would be all of the polarities would be able to be explained through a vibrational field being resonated through a star tetrahedron. So we add to our Fibonacci sequence, which is our most basic self-evolving, well, it's not self-evolving because it's purely linear, so self-replicating sequence. If we then add to that the, oh, by the way, the star tetrahedron applies entirely to the phi ratio, so all of the angles and lines on a star tetrahedron all correspond precisely to phi. So essentially, we have the basic fundamental fundamental unit of the universe being a tetrahedron or a star tetrahedron to describe polarities. From this, we can basically build everything from every structure, every shape that you see can be constructed out of interlacing geometrical shapes built from the star tetrahedron. Now, if we were to take that ability to build complex structures purely from the addition of star tetrahedrons on star tetrahedrons, that if we then apply the Fibonacci sequence as a fractal generator to the star tetrahedron, then we begin to see a complexification of geometries which would perpetuate until such a point that each iteration would be more complexity than the entire subset could contain. Now, it's my assertion that this is actually how the Big Bang worked. We're not talking about an actual physical explosion, we're talking about a numerical explosion. It's entirely possible that when the Big Bang, the initial start of the universe happened, it may have been on the two-dimensional plane. There may have been no up in the initial universe. I would even go so far as to say that in the universe inhabited by bacteria, that there may have been no up. The universe of the bacteria may well have been a two-dimensional bacteria. Bacteria tend to exist on the surface of things. So in if a group of bacteria were co-creating their universe, they would have no need for a construct of up, and so therefore their universe that they perceived would be a two-dimensional plane. It's entirely possible that then, once the maximum complexity, that again there, for the biology to appear in the first place, I would suggest would be a natural product of this continual, repeated reiteration of the simple fractal algebraic construct that the Fibonacci sequence, with relation to phi as a biological ratio, you can imagine how all of the complexity that we see in the universe can be arrived at given a prolonged length of time and a repeated number of iterations. Now, like I say, it's my suspicion that the microbes and bacteria would have been the first biology to have entered the universe, and possibly therefore the first consciousness. As a result, the universe that they created for themselves, imagined for themselves, would have been a flat land. It would have been a two-dimensional universe. Wouldn't necessarily have had any suns or any source of light, seeing as they have no eyes, no way of receiving that light. So if there's no way of perceiving it, the digital virtual reality won't create it. At this point, actually, I meant to start on this as it goes, just to explain the concept of digital virtual reality. Again, very specific terms. Digital simply in opposition to analog, that instead of the objective Newtonian analog model where a planet circles a sun in a in a perfect sinusoidal wave pattern without any steps as it goes around, a perfect smooth arc. In the digital reality model, the arc is in fact drawn in discrete steps in exactly the same way as curves are drawn on your computer screen. Your computer cannot draw a curve. It can draw a succession of straight lines which can be of such discrete lengths that your eye perceives a curve. Granulation, it's called. And essentially, that the arc of the planet is described in discrete quanta of time. And according to Tom Campbell and his researchers, I have no reason to dispute him, he says that the discrete quanta that time works to is a factor of 10 to the minus 44 of a second. So basically the refresh rate, the frame rate, if this was your television would be running at 25 frames a second, and you would not notice any motion blur or stop frame. Your eye would see a smooth linear action on the screen. Well, it would appear that the frame rate of the universe runs at a zero, a decimal point, and then 40 odd zeros, and then a 1 of a second. It's a nanosecond. It's a tiny portion of time, and that these quanta of time are so tiny and so close together that that essentially we perceive the universe as being analog when in fact it's digital. It's just that we don't zoom in on the details so closely that we begin to see the granulations. Although, talking about granulations, NASA made an observation at the boundary of the universe, the boundary of the observable universe. And I can't remember the specifics of the experiment, but they announced the experiment in advance, and they said in advance that they were looking to see if the universe was objective or whether it was holographic in nature. And this experiment was set up to quite clearly define one way or the other. And the results of the experiment came back in that the observed boundary of the universe is granular, that it is not linear, that it's not a smooth surface, and as a result, because it's granular, that means it's holographic. That means that the boundary of the universe, of the observed universe, as we know it under current observations, is granular, and that granularity, that lumpiness, indicates that in fact the universe is a fractal hologram where the macrocosm, the outer reaches of the universe are so far away, and the requirement to fill in that much data is so unneeded that the data simply isn't there. It becomes pixelated essentially at the outer reaches. Okay. All right. So the point here is that that we would appear to create reality with our conscious minds, with our intent. We generate the reality, the stuff and substance that we see and feel around us. And while initially that may seem controversial, perhaps antithetical, contrary to our perception of hard stuff, that in fact that this is part of the program, that this is what Tom Campbell would refer to as the rule set. Continuity is one of the rules that he says is absolutely fundamental to... one second, I can hear yapping puppies. Okay, I'm going to have to close that door so I can't bloody hear them. I can't hear them too much. You wouldn't believe that's a 5-stone puppy making that little yop, yop. Right, okay, so it would appear that we collectively create, well in fact we individually create our own universes, and that the collective programming of our children, the instilling in our children the collective agreed reality is basically what defines the reality that our children grow up to perceive themselves. And so the very fact that we have been taught that fire is hot, that hard things are hard, that you can't walk through walls or jump to other parts of the planet, are all basically borne out by repetition and repeated steerings from our parents, from society, from TV, from books, and in the past it would have been cultural, purely in the experiential realm, within the village. And I think that this is where Tom Campbell really hits the nail on the head with his concept of a rule set, because I have always been fascinated by the apparent ability for various sort of acts of telekinesis, psi abilities, telepathy, abilities to predict things, synchronicities, all of these sort of things present big questions with the current model. And it had always troubled me that most of the schools of thought that claimed to have some sort of an answer to some of these quandaries all seemed to rely on some kind of a magical, mystical, you can't really understand this. Where Tom Campbell really comes to his fore is because he appears now to have given this an actual mechanism, and that with that mechanism we can begin to dismantle the overlay, the intellectual overlay over what is in fact the actual subset, the rule set, the laws of the universe in this digital virtual reality. Again, I may not be that convincing about digital virtual reality, but let's see if Tom can... I played a lot of Tom earlier, but this is just a short pod, about 10 minutes long, where he essentially sums up how his big theory of everything, his digital reality theory, pretty much doesn't depart from any of the earlier scientific discoveries. It doesn't depart from Newtonian mechanics or quantum mechanics or relativistic mechanics, but it is an adjunct to them, showing them to be the subset of what could be a larger physical construct. So here's a bit of Tom Campbell for you.
Okay, so now we're going to really get started with that short introduction. I'm very likely to break some of your favorite paradigms, run over a few of your most cherished cultural, personal, and scientific beliefs. Bound to happen. But instead of believe or disbelieve what I say, just consider the possibilities and assess the probability. Use open-minded skepticism until you find out for yourself. You must develop your personal big picture from your personal experience. Always remain both open and skeptical. If you're not open, you'll never learn anything new. If you're not skeptical, you'll never know that what you're learning is something you're imagining and making up, or something that's real that exists outside of you. Something that's valid. Okay, now big truth must be discovered individually. Proof lies only in individual, personal experience. You must learn to assess situations in terms of probability instead of applying the certainty of belief to all of your, unknowns. That's just a bad habit. You must learn to live gracefully with uncertainty. Okay, we're going to talk about some big picture scientific models. Now, a big picture model is a model that describes everything. Objective, subjective, physics, metaphysics, normal, paranormal, has to describe all of it. That's a big picture theory of everything. Okay. To be valuable, big picture science must provide a superset. It must provide better, more complete physics and better, more complete metaphysics. After all, if it's a theory of everything, then it needs to do better physics as well. And we're going to see how that works. Okay, today I'm going to explain big picture science, and we'll show that big picture science derives little picture science, as well as metaphysics. Okay, first, a historical perspective. Albert Einstein worked on a thing called unified field theory for about the last 25 years of his life. Okay, and this was the first TOE, theory of everything, first scientific TOE, theory of everything. Basically, I would call it a little TOE, because Einstein only was interested in having a theory of the objective world, of the physical world. So that's a little TOE. That doesn't include the subjective and the paranormal and that sort of thing. Now, his theory really centered around two specific values, two specific numbers that he wanted to bring together. Okay, what this TOE was, it's an overarching set of concepts that allowed him to unify both relativity theory and quantum mechanics, because those were the two newest and best and most comprehensive pieces of science at the time. This was back in the early 1900s. But they were incompatible. They have basic assumptions at their root that just aren't compatible with each other. That tells you, if you're clever like Einstein, that there's something else at a higher level that will explain both. See, what we see is that once we get at a higher level, we see what we thought was true before becomes a special case. You see, before we thought the Earth was flat, then we knew it was round, and flat becomes a special case for short distances. Over short distances, flat's a good model, you see. Then we had Newton's classical mechanics, then we had quantum mechanics and relativistic mechanics, and suddenly Newton's mechanics became a special case that only holds for big things, slow speeds, that kind of stuff. So that's generally the way science works. Einstein was looking for that overarching thing that made relativity and quantum mechanics their own special case. Okay. He didn't find it. 25 years he didn't find it. But he did come to some understandings that I'm going to read some quotes from, and it'll just give you an idea where good science by the best scientists leads you when you work on these big problems of finding big truth. Okay, Einstein said, "There is no space which remains, since space does not have an independent existence. Reality is merely an illusion." He said, "It's clear that the space of physics is not, in the last analysis, anything given in nature or independent of human thought. Okay? It is a function of our conceptual scheme." Okay? That means space is a function of mind, a function of consciousness. Okay? That's a pretty big thought, right, for the kind of the top scientist of the last century and a half. Okay, space, as conceived by Newton, proved to be an illusion. Here's a physicist, David Bohm. He worked with Einstein. He was a contemporary and a co-worker on this unified field theory. He said, "To meet the challenge before us, our notions of cosmology and the general nature of reality must have room in them to permit a consistent account of consciousness." In other words, he knew consciousness was at the root of reality, and vice versa. Our notions of consciousness must have room in them to understand what it means for its content, the content of consciousness, to be reality as a whole. This doesn't sound like physicists, does it? Talking about consciousness is the fundamental root of reality. But these aren't just physicists; these are the best of the best. Bohm and Einstein were two of the very best physicists. But how? See, they understood consciousness was at the core of reality, but they didn't know what to do with that because they were looking for an objective reality. Consciousness is not objective. Consciousness is in here. It's all individual. It's all subjective. You can study somebody else's consciousness, but that doesn't tell you a whole lot about the nature of consciousness or reality. It's subjective. So they were stuck. There was a wall. They couldn't get over that. Okay, so here's Einstein writing a letter to Bohm, 1954. "One has to find a possibility to avoid the continuum together with space and time altogether. But I have not the slightest idea what kind of elementary concepts could be used in such a theory." See, up against the wall, stuck. Consciousness is the root, but how? Okay, well, coming from a different direction, actually, quantum mechanics produced an even stranger view of reality, which is what led Einstein and Bohm to this idea. This is the experiment called the double-slit experiment. This experiment showed that the experimenter was indeed entangled with the creation of reality itself. Very important, probably one of the most seminal scientific experiments had been done, period. Okay, well, what this double slit experiment was all about is for many, many years, scientists knew that if you put a wave toward a barrier that has two slits in it, what happens is that some of the light will go through each slit, and when it does, the light that goes through each slit kind of becomes a new source. Now, notice that this line is a little shorter than this line. When that distance between those two lines is some integral number of wavelengths, then the two waves come just one phase behind the other. So what happens is you get this case. The two humps go together, the two dips go together. That's called superposition in physics. You add. When that happens, you get a spot of light. Now, what happens in between here is those are the places where the difference between these two lines is an integral number of half wavelengths, which means you get this case where one dip is another trough, and a trough and a dip, you see, and they cancel each other out, so you get a dark space. This is called a diffraction pattern. Physicists had seen, and people in optics had been doing this for 20 years. This was not new. Light was a wave. This was a wave characteristic. Water waves will do a similar kind of thing. It's just a wave. Well, then Einstein, studying the photoelectric effect, discovered experimentally that light transferred energy and momentum in discrete units. Okay, light came in little chunks. Well, that made it look like a particle, because that's the way particles are. Waves are supposed to be continuous energy, right? They're not supposed to come in little discrete chunks. Einstein showed they come in little discrete chunks. This experiment showed that it's a wave. So it was like, well, what is it? You can't be both a particle and a wave. So the physicists of the day said, well, let's just take a single photon, one at a time, and fire it toward these grates and see what happens. Let's fire a chunk at it and see what happens. And what they expected to happen was this. If it's a particle, it goes through and hits right behind the slit, right? That's what Newton told us. A particle travels in a straight line unless interacted on by an outside force, right? Newton's second law, I believe. So that's what they expected to see, particle acting like a particle. What they saw, and they, of course, didn't fire one photon. Photons don't break into little pieces and scatter into various dots. They hundreds of thousands of photons, but one at a time. And what they got wasn't this. They got this diffraction pattern. Well, how did a particle go through here, and this bright spot is right behind the middle, behind this boundary. It's not even behind a slit. There were no light behind any slit. And they got this diffraction pattern. So they said, that's really confusing.
For God's sakes, done it a bloody again. Because I keep playing the YouTubes and muting my mic out. I'm so sorry. Right, okay, where was I? Right, one moment. Got to think back to where I started from there. All right, Tom Campbell. Bloody hell, this pod's going to take some tidying up. Loads of dead air. And Vin, fuck off. I'm making up for Mally not being on earlier. The TNS component of dead air hasn't been met yet for this evening, so I'm just making up. Right, okay. Yeah, Tom Campbell was basically saying there that when Einstein came along with his special relativity model, that it didn't overwrite the Newtonian model, that the Newtonian model was then contained as a subset, as a small group description of a more discrete portion of reality, that it applied, like he says, to large things that aren't moving very fast, in essence. The relativistic model then describes the subatomic world with some sort of clarity, and we then get into describes the atomic world with some clarity, and then we get into quantum physics, which then goes on to describe the subatomic world. Now, what I'm suggesting is that digital virtual reality is the overarching model that describes the sub-ether or the ether, what could be described as the matrix, the underlying chassis of the universe. Now, Churchhead was just, and Dave were just chatting about the Mandelbrot set there in the chat box, and Churchhead kindly put up a little link to a picky of a Mandelbrot set. These are one of these fractal images that you can generate on your computer. Look a bit like an ink blot. And if you zoom into them, they are infinitely zoomable. You can pick any point on the Mandelbrot set and just zoom in and in and in, and you'll be presented with more and more detail. Right, okay. Yes, everyone in the universe pulls till I catch up with him. Alright, so I would suggest that the Mandelbrot set itself describes a two-dimensional form, and while it's intriguing, and Churchhead graciously pointed out that it contains the Fibonacci sequence in the numberings and sizes of its component sort of make-up parts. I would suggest that unless it would be possible to, funnily enough, I've actually been working with an American on this only just the last couple of weeks. Not got very far with it just yet. He seems to need to do a bit of catching up on geometry, but he'd written a small piece of two-dimensional, like a spirograph, like a piece of software that essentially mimicked what we would know as a spirograph. And I've been in discussions with him about whether it would be possible to add a z-axis and to then reiterate, i.e. to put the output from the two-dimensional spiral into the input of the algorithm that generates the spiral at 90 degrees, and would be very interested in seeing what sort of things come out of the interaction of those two algebraic functions. My suspicion is that we're going to start to get some very organic shapes being kind of drawn in 3 dimensions in 3D space. This is one of the issues here as well with the Mandelbrot. I was just discussing with Churchhead in the chat box there that perhaps if the Mandelbrot set could be rotated through 90 degrees and then reiterated, that we may start to see some of the biological forms that you can describe through the Fibonacci sequence, but in 2 dimensions I find that the Mandelbrot set doesn't really correspond to many biological shapes. There are some that you can see in there. You can see quite clearly how sort of ferns and things, starfish, quite 2-dimensional forms you see in the Mandelbrot set. But you don't really see anything there that jumps out at you in 3 dimensions, which is, certainly I've seen some 3D graphical representations of interference geometries, I suppose they would have been, and they were creating some of the most incredible visual graphics. Lions' heads appearing out of the middle of them. There's actually one, if you've got a Winamp. If you try the milk drop visualizer on there and play some fairly sort of synthesized music, tends to drive the fractal generation in it the best. And if you study the milk drop software, that's actually some sort of a fractalizer being used to generate the images on the screen. And although there are some pre-programmed images, sort of landscape scenes and ferns and things like that, largely what you're seeing on the screen is simply an interaction of the music with a pre-defined fractal algorithm generator, and so you can quite clearly see how the shifting patterns of line and wave can form most of the organic shapes that we recognise. Right, okay. Right, okay. Well, Churchhead's pleased with that answer. He says, yep, that's precisely what he meant. Right, when I said that the Mandelbrot set is the fractal blueprint for things that are then constructed by sacred geometry. Okay, all right. So yeah, that would be probably the application of phi as your 90-degree tangent. So if you're imagining your Mandelbrot set, the fractal generating the Mandelbrot set generating a two-dimensional fractal image, if you were to then apply phi through 90 degrees to the flat surface, so add an x, a z coordinate, and use 1.1 over 1.1618 as your codifier, I suppose, as your output from your 2D Mandelbrot set position in x and y would then be translated through phi to give a coordinate in the third dimension, in the z coordinate. And again, I would love to see, I mean, to be quite honest, I can tell you I've got a pretty hardcore gaming PC here, and I would suggest that if I was to try and put any sort of a software that was able to do that in real time into this, it would probably be taking several hours to generate each frame. Right, okay. Alright, so Dave's jumped back in with sorting a vibrating plate. What the bloody hell's that called? I can't remember the description of it. Basically, if you take a flat plate of steel and mount it, preferably on a nodal point in the steel, so a dead point, so if you were to dust it with flour and bash it with a hammer, the bit that didn't have any flour jiggling about on it would be the place that you'd put your bolt through, and then sprinkle your flour or your salt back on it and draw a bow across it. As you draw pure notes, you see geometric shapes forming in the patterns in the flour or the salt, and that these patterns are reliable and repeatable and are as a consequence of the interference actions of the initial wave, the initiator wave coming from the drawn bow, and the reflected wave coming from the edges of the steel plate, and that these interference patterns cause regular routine shapes to appear. And funnily enough, this actually goes exactly into where I wanted to go. Thank you, Dave. Well done, mate. In as much as that when you change from drawing a perfect pitched note and draw the bow faster or slower, as you move between a perfect pitched note, an off-pitched note, and then to the next perfect pitched note, what tends to happen is that the note will drift out of perfect pitch, but the pattern will remain, will become more and more disturbed by the off-key nature of the note. It will then reach a point of dissipation, that the entire pattern will disappear and will become entirely chaotic, and it won't be until a certain level of perfect pitch has been acquired again that the next pattern will form, and this will be distinctly different from the kymatics. Thank you, Churchhead. Will be completely different from the patterns before. Again, there's nothing hugely miraculous about this. This is simply the interaction of maths, the coalescing of positives and minuses, where a positive and a positive will amplify, a minus and a minus will defeat, and a plus and a minus will be a nominal amplitude, and the interaction of fields of waves, a bit like dropping several stones in a pond, create a set of ripples with lines drawn through them that aren't part of the ripples themselves. They're separate to, like a wave travelling at 90 degrees to the wave itself. This is what Tom Campbell was going on about with the double slit experiment and the positioning of the received photons on the far side of the experiment. Oh yeah, funny enough, Dave. Actually, just yeah, there was an experiment done. I've been trying to find the video again. I've no idea. I think it was on YouTube, but I've no idea. It was of suspended lipids in an oil solution, where lipids are small fat cells, and essentially this cloudy solution in a spherical flask, when blasted with notes of sound, would generate the lipids would go to these nodal points, like I was just describing there with the flat sheet of steel. That the point where there is no resonance, where there is no vibration, is a nodal point. It's a flat point in those interacting waves. Well, where was I going with that? The nodal points in this lipid suspension generate a three-dimensional holographic, effectively, star tetrahedron in the fluid when a particular pitch is hit, which again would explain a lot of why we see many of these kind of star tetrahedral shapes, or the resultant shapes of the evidence star tetrahedral kind of energy pattern in things like the atmospheres of planets, the positioning of asteroid belts, and the positioning of the planets and the stars, and going down into the subatomic structure, the distances inside atoms, again, are all defined by these same kind of geometries. Okay, so as Dave keeps randomly swapping between Dave Freeman and Mad Prophet, we're going to go MP or D. He's just mentioning the Psi experiment, who was a polygraph tester who decided to connect a polygraph meter to plants, and was able to absolutely prove gold standard science that plants not only can sense the presence of other biological forms in their region, but that they also react to the emotional content of those other biological forms, and, like he says, go mental at the random boiling of a bunch of brine shrimp from quite a significant distance as well. I should have brought up some Rupert Sheldrake as it goes, because that's again dials into the morphogenetic field theory, where Rupert Sheldrake suggests that we are literally all interconnected by a collective consciousness that defines our interactions with each other and with the rest of biology, and he uses that to explain the ability of flocking birds and schooling fish to respond infinitely more quickly than the nerve signal responses that would be required by a normal idea of biology. Would basically, they'd all crash into each other if they were relying on looking and reacting to each other in any sort of a sense that we would understand. It basically, Sheldrake suggests that they've basically become a single organism, that the multiples of birds in a flock and the multiples of fish in a shoal essentially share a collective consciousness with which they have no need to respond physiologically to each other. They're able to essentially feel each other. So, right, okay, I could probably do a collecting my thoughts, checking for any other questions. I hope I've answered that one to your satisfaction. Digital and analogue, I would still like to cover a little more, so we'll go there. But first of all, let's have a bit of Planet Gong. There's a bit of Here and Now, Floating Anarchy. Okay, that was Here and Now with Floating Anarchy. I always like that little tale of Here and Now being Gong's, tribute act. And Gong loved them so much, having seen them play, that they absorbed them into the main band itself. So hence that was Here and Now with Gong. What? No point in you just come in to fuss the bloody puppies, for God's sakes.
I love the puppies.
Yeah, okay, you love the puppies, now piss off. Right, okay, let me see if I can clarify this. Alan, you're asking some very pertinent questions, thank you, in the chat box there. Essentially, if I'm correct in thinking that the microbial world, the virus world, the RNA world, the world that existed before any of the complex biological structures existed, only required a two-dimensional reality. At the point where the biological complexification of the bacteria, the RNA, the viruses had completed the maximum available complexity in a two-dimensional universe, that at that point the universe, like the resonating plate in the kinematics experiments, reaches a fuzzy point, an in-between point, a chaotic point, that the existing subset of the universe reaches this maximum complexity in the given confines, and at this point a pinch point in reality, a hyperbolic pinch point, is created in which the holographic nature of the complexity of the pre-existing subset is carried on into a small seed subset, which is expressed once more through a dimension that is, if you could imagine it to be 90 degrees to the reality of the time. So when we go from the maximum complexity in the two-dimensional bacteria world, that as soon as they begin to organise into, as soon as we reach this pinch point, we have a 90-degree extra dimension available to them to express their complexity back into, and we begin to see bacteria stacking themselves on top of each other and creating what we now see as plants. I would also suggest that that's possibly how the major dimensions were created, from the consciousness of very basic expressions of this fractal reality, and that through many, many reiterations, many millions of years, many billions of years of mathematical evolution, that each subsection of what we now experience as reality, that when plants reached a kind of maximum complexity, that's when we then see animals and things beginning to appear, that there will be a fractal pinch point that will take all of the information that has been gleaned from the subset previously and apply that once more into, again, this... funnily enough, phi comes into that one there, Churchhead, because the pinch point is obviously going to be a phi proportion of the previous subset. So it would be a phi ratio proportion of the original subset that would then go on to be the holographic seed that sowed the new complexification through an extra dimension. And when I'm talking about dimensions, once obviously you've got to the end of the major dimensions, the 3 of space and the 1 of time, that I think that we then begin to complexify into discrete dimensions. So we would then, once we have the dimensions of space and the dimensions of time, you could consider the dimension of perhaps dark and light and that once dark and light has been explored to its maximum complexity, that then dark and light would separate off into the colours. Again, another discrete dimension within the dimension of dark and light, which without the dimension of colour, one wouldn't be able to experience. So again, what we're seeing is the universe just simply being a natural expression of the underlying math of the universe, and that in fact the universe was in fact possibly even brought into existence in and of itself out of number, and that possibly that the complexity that has built up out of that reiteration of number through fixed form and structure has created the tapestry of reality that we perceive now, and that it's my assertion that we, the human species, have created the visible universe. It's my assertion that before there were animals walking this earth that could see beyond the local solar system in any meaningful sense, that the stars would have been nothing more than a blanket of light covering the sky, that the universe would not have been extended beyond the visible horizon, and it was only once we created the ability to magnify the sky through telescopes and to then go on to larger and larger telescopes looking further and further out into the universe, that we have literally projected the universe out in front of us. And so everything that we see in the universe now as the macro universe is in fact an expression of human desire and human intent. Okay, so why digital? Why holographic? Why virtual? And if that is the case, does this rely on some kind of great computer that is running this as a subroutine? Well, kind of yes. But that great computer is the universe itself, the very substance that it has created for itself. And again, if you think about the un-universe, the pre-universe, the empty void, the universalist ether, with no structure, with no differences, with no time, nothing exists, absolute nothing. Now, in that space, I mean, with no time, obviously, in eternity is a meaningless phrase, but essentially, with the we use maths to describe something that already pre-exists in nature. Mathematics is not an invention of the mind. Mathematics is just the stuff of stuff. Yeah, with the numbers that we apply, the symbols that we apply to that stuff of stuff is what we call mathematics. But the number without the symbols underlies the stuff of the universe. One is one. I mean, if you've got one apple, you've got one apple. If you've got two apples, you've got two apples. You don't need the symbols of 1 and 2 to understand the concept of 2, or 1, or none. So essentially, we have a number sequence which is natural, is intrinsic to possibly the pre-universe. And that in expressing different variants on those mathematics, eventually the initial spark, the initial single-dimensional plane, this wouldn't even be a plane, the single-dimensional universe sprang into existence at the separation of the first polarity. So, I mean, the Buddhist teachings suggest that from oneness the universe was unable to study itself and was therefore unable to learn or grow, and so from oneness it separated through duality into the current expression of the universe, where we consistently exist within that duality and are essentially the universe being the overarching consciousness, and that we are subsets of that consciousness put here to experience the universe expressing itself. So a little look in the chat box. Right, okay. Right, okay. Yeah, mind is space and everything is in it. Well, this... all right, okay, so we get that there's no need for a grand computer. But what this does mean is that we, like the characters in The Sims, or like the characters in World of Warcraft, like a virtual, holographically generated persona, we have to adhere to the rule sets that pre-exist within the requirements for continuity within those virtual realities. And so we find ourselves, the Sim character, we find ourselves, the Warcraft character, existing within a self-existing, self-replicating, self-evolving, mathematical, numerological, virtual reality, where we only exist purely to experience the unfolding of the fractal geometries that have already been carrying on their subroutines for billions of years without us. We are merely the most advanced witness that has evolved yet to examine the universe, and that this is the point here, is that we have now reached the point where we have become conscious of our nature as creators. That if my assertion that the development of the telescope was in fact what generated the universe, are you beginning to get the significance of this? We, with our belief, with our intent, with our desire, created the 13 billion light year across universe as it's currently known, and that this, I believe, is totally borne out by the Hubble Deep Field image, where we shone our most powerful telescope at an area of sky that was previously thought to be completely empty of stars, and when we examined it, we found that not only was it not empty, but that it was absolutely crammed full of not only stars but galaxies. So it's entirely possible that our ability to observe that far into the universe has now quite literally extended the universe beyond its pre-existing boundaries before we made that observation. And again, this is borne out by Tom Campbell's work. Right, okay. Okay, I suppose to tie in Sheldrake's work here as well into seeing, Sheldrake suggests that seeing is a two-way process where we both project our preconceptions out into the universe as a projection and receive others' preconceptions in as what we see as visible light. And I would take this a bit further. I would suggest that if you were to put on a pair of 3D virtual reality specs, and that the 3D holographic simulation was matched to your head movements and your body movements, and that the virtual reality software was realistic enough, immersive enough to be video realistic or even real realistic, then it would be indistinguishable from real life if you were to put some sort of rising and lowering platforms on your shoes so that you could feel difference in texture and surface height. It would be possible to have you walking entirely on the spot and have absolutely no concept that you were not simply walking around in a different place to where your body actually existed. Now, if we do away with the virtual reality glasses that are the clumsy devices that we need to create these virtual 3D simulations at the moment, and think of it more in the realms of a two-way projector, that if we were to have a holographic projector strapped to the tops of our heads, projecting into our entire field of vision, so filling our field of vision, so wherever we looked ahead, our field of vision would be filled with the output from this projector. And we run that same analogy of looking around into the world, then what essentially we are seeing when we look out into the world is our own projection of that world. It's the projection contained in the projector on the tops of our head, feeding our own perceptions out in front of us that we walk into, around in, and around in. Now, if we were isolated individuals, that would be what the universe would be. It would be exactly what we wanted to see. It would be exactly what we expected to see. It would be exactly what fitted with our preconceptions and our preconceived ideas of what the universe consisted of, what fitted with our reality rule set. Now, if we have two people walking around with projectors on their head, projecting their personal virtual reality out into the room, and these people now bump into each other, and their projections begin to overlap, then essentially each would perceive the part of the other's projection that met his or her preconceptions. So where the two projections correlated, where the two projections agreed, both parties would see exactly the same thing. Where there were discrepancies in the projection, then you would tend to see what you expected to see, or make of what you were seeing what you expected to be there. Now, if you add to this a whole planet full of people, 6.5, 7 billion of us, all shining our little projectors of reality out into the wilderness, and we're able to discuss the contents of this reality that we perceive with each other, and we correlate and corroborate and agree or disagree with each other's conceptions of reality. And so, as a society, as a group mind, this collective reality begins to form, where it's almost impossible to perceive that which is not perceived by the group mind, inasmuch as it would fall out of the realms of your preconception and therefore remain almost unilluminated by any of the projectors, by any of the transmitters, and therefore would not be there to be perceived, to be received. Now, what if we know that we are the projectors? What if we know that reality is only constructed out of the parts of it which we preconceive, the parts of it we believe in, the parts of it we hold to be true, the parts of it we project, the reality that we project out into the universe? Now, what if a group of us realise the nature of reality is this group projection, and begin to gather our minds around a selected group projection? If our collective decision is that we should live without the interference of the corporate bodies of law, then would it not be possible simply to live our lives in that way? Is it not possible to corroborate, to tally an agreement on each of these findings and push forward our own group agreement on the perspectives of this version of reality, and begin to correlate results? Because this is another thing that Tom Campbell insists on, that experiment is essential, that the act of testing this in real world scenarios. So there's no good just intellectualizing about changing the entire nature of reality just by thought. Okay? You can change the nature of reality just by thought, but to reinforce that thought, to make it so, as our church head would know, Luc Picard is so happy to repeat on many occasions, to make it so, we have to believe that it's possible to be so, and that possibly if we begin to experiment with this, if we begin to push the parameters of the reality that really I'm beginning to see as imposed upon us, that in time we may be able to sway the probability stream coming from the future, like Tom Campbell says, of everything that is possible in the future is acted on through the now and then processed through to the, to the past. And so simply by acting on a collective intention and by physically following that intention up with whatever actions will support it, whether that be discussion groups, leafleting, whatever it is, that we need to find those experimental results which corroborate this possibility, which will then reinforce and increase the power and potential of this. I mean, Tom Campbell reckons that this can be taken right out to about 80% accuracy. So I think that's something to be aimed at, that if we can possibly alter reality to within an 80% certainty, then certainly we should be able to take an entirely peaceable route out of the corporatocracy, the debtism, and the kleptocracy that we find ourselves in now with corporate greed and mainstream media sort of mind control. And okay, well, I suppose in conclusion, once more, my ability to broadcast the end of my show has been interrupted by an anomalous dropping of the stream. I name no names, cast no aspersion. I was just outlining there was the fact that if we are able to influence reality, if reality is this plastic domain that has a limited number of rule sets, and that if we, by study and reason and intellect, can master those rule sets and to use their predictive capacities to improve our odds in the probability wave function that is the flow of the future through the present into the past, that we might act like a virus, like a prion in their system, and incapacitate their ability to hold sway and influence over us, and perhaps we can see a non-violent, a passive trajectory from the current future potential to the desired future potential that we may wish for, that perhaps some of the elites that have corralled and constructed our allowed modes of thinking may have prevented from happening up until now. So anyway, I'm going to wrap up there. So it's good night from me, freemanjack on TNS Radio. That's tns.ning.com. TNS Radio, all one word, .ning.com. And you can catch my YouTube channel. That's freemanjack, TPUC FM, all one word. Okay, well, that's me signing off for another week. If you want to listen to some tunes, me and Super Dubs will be here on Thursday after midnight. Friday morning, Friday AM, midnight, till 3 AM with hottest tunes around, some oldies, some newies, some oddies. And I hope to have you back here again, 9 PM next Saturday. Thank you for listening. Thank you for taking part in the chat box. I hope that this has been a fairly complete description of a potential new model for reality. Okay, good night, folks.